Okay, shalom, boker tov, shavua tov. I apologize for the delay. We are learning today about Rabbi David Halevi Segal. He is the author of the Turei Zahav. I would like to dedicate the learning Mazal Tov to Jack and Phil Shapiro for the birth of their great grandson, right? So Bezat Hashem, may the Brit be on time and may grow and cause you a lot of nachat. Okay, so we are learning about the Turei Zahav, which is, on one hand, he lives in the same time era. He lives in the same time era as the Tosfot Yom Tov, Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller, about whom we spoke last week, but he is very different from him. Why? The two figures that we spoke about in the last 2 weeks, these are the Maharal and the Tosfot Yom Tov. Both of them, while they were great giants and pillars of Torah, and their Torah is being learned to this day, in a sense, they were outside of the institution, the rabbinic institution, if that may be. Obviously, there is no formal rabbinic institution. You know, we do not have a church. But in a sense, they were coming from the outside. They had new ideas, revolutionary ideas. They wanted to change the yeshivot. They wanted to change how people learn. So they were, in a sense, they were in the edge of the Torah world. Again, that says nothing about, obviously, the greatness of the Torah, and they have been accepted as Torah scholars, and they are being learned to this day. But in this sense, they were peripheral. Our hero for today, Rabbi David Halevi Segal, is, in a sense, is the embodiment of the Torah rabbinical institution of the 17th century. He was born to a family of Torah scholars, and not only Torah, but as we say, Torah v'gdula b'makom echad. So both Torah and great wealth, which in the heyday of Poland, we speak about the 17th century, before Gzerot Tach v'Tat, right, before the revolt of the Ukrainians. So these are really the very good days of the Polish Jews. They enjoy almost complete freedom in the civil field. So they can buy, they can do whatever Jews want, which is to buy, to sell, to sit and learn Torah and tefillah and build their shuls, and no one is interfering with them. So that was a very good time for the Jews in Poland. And many times the way it worked is that the rich people would look for their daughters for the Talmid Chacham of, they would go to the local yeshiva, to the local klois, and they would choose the greatest Talmid Chacham, or at least that is how allegedly it worked, and pick him for their girl to marry, preferably at the age of 12 or 13, because that was just the way things worked. Okay, so that was, and that caused that many times the same families were concentrating both Torah and wealth, which, again, it can be discussed in some other maybe shiur. Is it good or not? Because sometimes it would cause one person to be both the gvir of the city and the rav of the city. Now, is that a good thing, or do we want to separate between layman leadership and rabbinical leadership? As I said, that's a different question. But that was how life were lived, and people were, at least the Torah scholars, were very happy with this arrangement. So Rabbi David Halevi Segal was a son to this one of these elite Polish Torah and wealth families. So he's very well-to-do. His father is very well-to-do. His brother is an older brother named Shmuel. Excuse me, his father was named Shmuel. His older brother was named Yitzchak. And I do not know what was the age gap between them, but what we do see from the sources that this brother was his rabbi, at least in his early years. So it must be that the age gap was 10, 15 years, which is not, I mean, that it's not something that is very surprising or very unique, but there was some age gap that allowed the older brother to become the rabbi for his younger brother. and they are beautiful. We would read later beautiful letters that they exchanged between them after many years. So in the beginning, his older brother was more famous because he was first. So he learned first. He was famed for his genius and for his Torah. He wrote a few books. Some of them we have to this day. But his brother, his younger brother, David, and many times Rabbi David would play on this game of words, quoting from the Navi. If you may recall that in Sefer Shmuel, when Shmuel comes to anoint the new king, after Shaul is rejected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God sends Shmuel to Beit Lechem, and he says to him, go to the family of Ishai, and there I will tell you who is the son that needs to be the king. And you remember he comes to the family, and Ishai puts in front of him all the 7 children. But there is another boy, right, who is with the cattle in the fields. He's shepherding the cattle. But he's so young that, and maybe less important, that his father does not call him to be checked even by the prophet. And Shmuel in the beginning wants to crown the older brother, Eliab, who is also handsome and good looking, and he's tall, and he looks impressive and authoritative. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, no, we had enough of that. It says also about Shaul that he was very tall. So HaKadosh says to him, man sees to the eyes, but God sees to the heart. And in the end, there is this younger brother, the small brother, David, excuse me, would be chosen. And in a sense, we see from time to time that Rabbi David Halevi Segal felt the same way. He was the younger brother, but in the end, he is the one that was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anyway, it was not any type of competition. I want to emphasize that. As I said, Rabbi Yitzhak was teaching him, meaning his older brother was teaching him and empowering him and happy in his success. So we shouldn't reconstruct what I just said, that there was some type of a jealous or an envy. On the contrary, they seem to get along very, very, very nicely. As I said, in a very young age comes Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. Rabbi Yoel Sirkis wrote a commentary on the Arba'a Turim named the Bach. That is the echo name. The full name is Bait Chadash. We may remember that the very important posek Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, before writing the Shulchan Aruch, wrote a tome, a massive encyclopedia of halacha, and it was based upon the Arba'a Turim. He called this encyclopedia the Beit Yosef, the house of Yosef, named after Yosef, son of Yaakov Avinu, who gathered all the grain in Egypt into one treasury. So Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Beit Yosef, in which he gathered all the halacha into one house, into one treasury, into one home. Now, the Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, wrote a book, as I said, named Bait Chadash, a new house, in which you can see that he has some disagreements with the old house. That is the house of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Be it as it may, the Bach was extremely important posek, and he is looking for, also very wealthy, and he is looking for the right shidduch for his young daughter, Rivka. And we know the name. By that you see the importance of these families, because usually we do not know the women's name. So knowing the name is obviously a message about the importance of these people. And so we know the name is Rivka. And he's looking for the right shidduch, as I said, the right chatan for himself. And he is being pointed to the young Rabbi David Halevi Segal, and he speaks. I mean, there are many legends. As we will see, there are many legends about Rabbi David Halevi Segal. I would bring here only the legends that I think may be true. The ones that seems to me completely illogical, I right now I omit. So there are many stories about how went the meeting in the Bach and Rabbi David Halevi Segal. And according to the legends, he looked very simple person, and the Bach didn't understand why he's being sent to him, etc., etc. It doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't seem to be so. Rabbi David was it's clear from all the historical sources that he was extremely famous in his city as an Ilui from a very young age. Everyone knew he's a genius. As he came from a very well-to-do, both in Torah and in wealth, family, it seems to me very difficult that Rabbi Yoel Sirkis would see him as someone that as a simpleton, as an ignorant a young man. So it's in the end the shidduch was to be, and Rabbi David Halevi Segal married the daughter of Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, as I said, was very well to do. Also, Rabbi David came from a very well to do family. So that was a shidduch of in ve'agefen be'in ve'agefen. This was a shidduch of wealth, with Torah, and everything was just great, doing great. There is a beautiful story. Again, I am not aware of its historical sources. I mean, I don't know of any source before the 19th century, and here we speak about people that lived in the 17th century. So I cannot in any way validate the following story that I'm going to tell. It's a beautiful story nonetheless. The story goes that Rabbi David sued his father-in-law, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. Both of them became very famous Rabbanim. He's suing him to Din Torah, right, to rabbinical court. For what? Because Rabbi Yoel Sirkis made an obligation, a commitment toward Rabbi David, that he would supply him with a fleshy meal every day. And what was the argument? What was the debate about? Rabbi David argued that his father-in-law gives him re'ot. What are re'ot? Help me. Lungs, instead of real meat. So that was the issue. And he is going to the rabbinical court, but very interestingly, he doesn't argue any argument, just say this is not considered meat. And then stands up Rabbi Yoel, and obviously he's a genius, giant in Torah, and he proves from 101 sources that lungs are considered meat in halacha. We all know that if you eat lungs, you become fleshy. So there are many halachot from which you can prove that does considered as meat. And Rabbi David loses in court, and he doesn't argue back, and that's the end of the historical story, which is very strange. Now, the appendix to the story that is being told by the Chazon Ish, that's why I told you that the sources for the story are very recent. But he explains the story the following way, which I think is beautiful anyway. And he explains the story. He says that Rabbi David would learn Torah to the end of his abilities every day. And one night, hopefully, he will sleep, and Rabbi David. And he had this dream that in heaven, Rabbi Yoel is being sued to Din Torah in the heavenly court. Why? Because he was not supplying real meat, but only lungs to his son-in-law. So he has less koach, he has less strength to learn Torah. So a few minutes of Torah are being taken away from the word by the Bach only giving lungs and not real meat. Now, Rabbi Yoel wanted the Taz to be saved from the heavenly court. So he sued him in the earthly court, in the rabbinical court in this world, and by the rabbinical court in this world issuing a psak din and halacha that lungs are considered meat, the claims against Rabbi Yoel Sirkis in the upper world were rejected. It's a beautiful story. I gave it over and we continue. So we know that the Taz was, now I return to history. We do know that the Taz was greatly supported by his father-in-law, even after he left Ludmir, where that was the city where they live in Poland, nowadays Ukraine. So even after, usually the son-in-law would be supported by the father-in-law only as long as he lived with him. That was the minhag back then. What is the minhag now? Okay, I wouldn't ask. But that was the minhag back then. But because, as I said, Rabbi Yoel was a well-to-do person, he wanted to support his daughter even after they left the city. So Rabbi David left to a small city to become the Rav there, a place named Palachev, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was Palachev. And the Bach, we have the letters. The Bach sent him a letter that he says, I gave you some money, some money he gave him in loan, so I guess that he would be able to do business, and some money he would give him as a gift. So you have a nice letter in which he says, you know, I sent you some money as a loan. Some of it I do need back, so send me back. Some of it, we have a Yom Tov coming close. Please buy nice clothes and food for my daughter. So that's an interesting letter. And now we have to remember, Rabbi David may be very young. So maybe it seems to you strange that the father, maybe it doesn't seem strange, that the father-in-law interfering with what the son-in-law would buy for his daughter, but maybe it was 20, maybe very young. Okay. So all of this is beautiful. Now, not everything was as bright as I just spoke, as I just told. Rabbi David Halevi is, as was the minhag back then, so in the beginning he's a rabbi of a small community, and then as his Torah is being spread, and his learning is being enhanced, and his psikot are being known, so he is being upgraded, mekudam. How do you say mekudam, like in work? Is being promoted, thank you. So he's promoted, he's being given offerings from a better or bigger communities that can sustain himself better and also can sustain a yeshiva, which is really what Rabbi David wants to do, to open a yeshiva. And what part of his agreement with the community is that they have not only to finance, to support Rabbi David and his family, but also to support the yeshiva. And he comes to Krakow, which is a big Makom Torah, a big place of Torah, a big place of Jews, and he became the Rav Rashi of Krakow, which is a very important position. But there, a plague strikes and a disaster, and he loses his, at least two, we do not know, he writes Banai, my children, my sons. So we do not know the exact number, but it seems that he lost at least 2 sons in Krakow. Now, he himself, many, many years later, would write that the reason, it's very interesting, the reason why it happened to him, he says, is because he lived in an apartment above the shul. It seems that they gave him, the community built the shul, and above the shul, they had this type of a service apartment that was dedicated to the rabbi. So he lived there, and in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch about the prohibition to have an apartment that is higher than the shul, he says that he gives an hater, and he says, I do think that halachically the hater works, but I want to tell you that I think that you shouldn't use it. Why? Because I used it as a young man, and I lost yeladai. So again, I'm not sure what the number of yeladai is, but that's very sad. So he lost some of his children at least in this apartment above the shul, and then he also losing his wife, Rivka, the daughter of Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. And at that point, he decides to leave Krakow. And it may be because he didn't want the apartment, but what I would think, I mean, you can just move to the other side of the street. It seems that it was just too sad for him to remain in the place where he lost children and his beloved wife. And he's moving to a much, much smaller community. So that is a downgrade, right? He's down promoting himself. What is demoting himself. He's demoting himself. But again, very interestingly, his father-in-law, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, liked him so much that he said, you know, I have not another daughter. He didn't have another daughter, but he had another chatan, another daughter of the Bach passed away in a young age. So now it's a disaster, it's a tragedy what I'm speaking about, but I think I already mentioned that back then the life expectancy of women was much shorter than the men because of the hazards of giving birth. That was just how life were lived. And so the Bach lost both his daughters. Excuse me, the Bach lost. Yeah, no, but that is a mistake because it's nothing to do with 2 chatanim. So the Bach lost a daughter and a chatan. No, I'm wrong. Something here doesn't make sense. No, and a daughter-in-law. That's it. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, the Bach lost a daughter and a daughter and the chatan-in-law, a son-in-law. Thank you. That's it. He lost a son-in-law. So he matched his daughter-in-law with his son-in-law,
Daughter and son. He lost daughter and son.
That's right.
And he remained with son-in-law and daughter-in-law.
That's right.
He matched them.
And he matched them. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm pretty bad in genealogy. Okay, but you understand I think that's it's a tragedy, as I said, but it's a story about family, about people that really love each other and take care of each other. So it's a very functioning family. It's a family that was struck by tragedies, but also a very functioning family in which the family members are trying to take care and love each other. So Rabbi David Halevi is being married again. Everything remains in the family, remains in the family of the Bach. And he has children also from the new wife, about whom we would speak, Be'ezrat Hashem, more towards the end of the shir. Okay, now he had a few very difficult years because obviously after losing his children and his wife, he had a very emotional difficult years, but also in the smaller city, he was not compensated in a way that was sustaining himself. And I guess that he also had, before he got remarried, he had to somehow take care of his children, which also blocked him from the ability to earn parnasa. And he had some very, very difficult years. Because we remember he grew up with, as we say, with a golden spoon, a silver spoon in his mouth. And now he had some very, very difficult and turbulent years. In the end, he's being given, after being remarried and having children, now he's being given an offering from a kehila in Astra, or Ostrog, which was, again, a very big Jewish city in Ukraine. Everything is happening in Ukraine. There was no Ukraine back then. It was part of Poland, which is a major part of the continuation of the story, but everything is happening in more or less in the same geographical area. So he's moving now to Ostrog, where he's being given money both for himself, and he again can raise his head, and also to sustain a very large yeshiva. He himself would write that he never saw yeshiva as big as the one that now he was heading. So obviously he doesn't write it in order to honor himself, he writes it in order to honor the people that were sustaining, the people that were supporting, that were contributing and donating to this yeshiva that he was heading. And there he began to publish his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He didn't begin to write it there. He writes that it was a lifelong project. He wrote it throughout his life. But now, finally, he had the time to sit and go with his students through his commentary and be able to see what is good and what needs to be corrected. And also he was encouraged by them that this is a material that he should print, because he had many fears that maybe he doesn't want to print and doesn't want people to rely on his halacha. Maybe chas v'chayla is wrong and he would cause people to be mistaken. So he was very worried, but he was encouraged by his students and by the people of the community to stand up and print his perush, his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. His commentary on the Shulchan Aruch he called the Turei Za'av. Now the Turei Za'av is a play on words on Torei Za'av, Na'aselach. That is a pasuk from Shir HaShirim. So that is on one hand. On the other, he didn't call it Torei with Taf, as in Shir HaShirim. He called it Turei with Tet. Why? Because he says, I write it also as a commentary on the Arba Turim of the Tur in the Shulchan Aruch. This is Turei. Zahav is a gematria of his name. So that is why he's called it's Zahav. David is, I hope so, I didn't check it. Does that work? Hopefully. That's what he writes in his Akdama. So Turei Zahav. So it's the Turim of David. Turei David, Turei Zahav. So that's why I call it Turei Zahav. And what is his goals in writing this commentary on the Shulchan Aruch? It's fascinating because he has two contradicting goals. And even when writing the preface, the Hakdama, to his commentary, he seems to not be able to reconcile these two contradicting goals. So let's see it, in source Vav. And so the earlier sources are the things that we spoke about Baal Peh. So look at source 5, that is Akdama, is the introduction to Yoreh De'ah. Yoreh De'ah is the part of the Shulchan Aruch which deals with Isur ve'Heter, meaning what is allowed, what is not allowed. So inyanim, issues of food, prohibited and allowed food, and aveilut, what are you allowed and not allowed to do. That is the Yoreh De'ah part of the Shulchan Aruch, and that was the first one that Rabbi David printed his commentary on. So his introduction is on the Taz Yoreh De'ah. And that's what he writes there. Be'harchiv Hashem et gevul b'nei Yisrael. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu had expanded the gvul, the area of Bnei Yisrael, va'irbu vayatzmu, and they became mighty and many. Now that is amazing. Obviously he writes in an era in which for 1,600 years there was no geographical location for the Jewish people. So what does he speak about when he speaks about the area of the Jews is being expanded? He doesn't speak about the physical moledet, the physical homeland of the Jewish people. He speaks about the portable homeland of the Jewish people. He speaks about the Torah. He says the Torah is expanding. ותמלא הארץ דעה את השם בתלמוד ופוסקים. So everyone learns now Torah. So we can see from here reflected, as I said, the heyday of Polish Jewry. He says the world is full of Torah. Now, obviously, he was, as I said, he was one of the elite families and he knew his own circle. There were poor people, there were people that couldn't learn. It's not that everything was just golden candies. But these were very good times. These were very good times, and it's reflected through his writing. והיה ריבוי אחר מיעוט, יען כי היה נעלם מעין כל אל מי מקדושים יפנה, לדעת מה יעשה בישראל, לדבר הלכה. So the problem is when Torah expands, that the expansion is also, in a sense, it's a limitation. Why? Because when there are many opinions in the market, you do not know which one to turn to. So people became confused. Should they follow the Rambam? Should they follow the Rosh? Who should we follow? And then stood up, שלח לפניהם איש לעבד נמכר, יוסף. העובד העיר יעבדו מכל שבטי ישראל. He is using here many psukim. I would skip now explaining how each pasuk is being interpreted, and you can just enjoy the atmosphere of how he writes. So he says, God sent Yosef before the people. So obviously he's alluding to Yosef, the son of Yaakov, that was sent before the family of Yaakov to gather the food. In the same way, Rabbi Yosef Karo was sent before Israel to gather all of the halachic opinions. And he is a mashbir bar mazon umaziach afikim ripe kolev nishbar. So he was able to heal, to give remedy to this problem of the multiplicity of opinions that we do not know who to turn to. And he gave us the Bet Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, ואסף איש טהור מכל המחנות הקדושים והיו לאחדים בידו. And he said it was beautiful. He gave us one single unitary psak. Beautiful. And he's called Yosef, he says. Why does he call Yosef? Yosef is to add, because there was another son added. Again, with Rachel, it was Yosef, to whom was added Binyamin. But he says, for us it was Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, to whom was added Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Israelish. He's the Ashkenazi posek who wrote the mapa, the tablecloth on the Shulchan Aruch, on the set table. We spoke about him. All right, so he says, now we have Baruch Hashem, everything was beautiful. We have the Shulchan Aruch for the Sfardim, and we have the Rema for the Ashkenazim, and everything is nice and fine. Is it? Obviously not. Why not? Because they were not able to systemize everything and to conclude and to summarize everything. Because what happened the Taz leaves 100 years after Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Rema. And their book, instead of being the end of halachic discussion, was only the beginning. Because all the commentaries, all the poskim are now using the Shulchan Aruch as a starting point to the new discussion. So he says the goal was not achieved. So I need now to set the record straight for now and for eternity. You can already guess what happened later, but okay, it's very easy to see it in hindsight and say that there is no real way to conclude halacha, everything that would be written. If it is important enough to conclude, it would also be important enough to become the starting point of new discussions. But back then, somehow it's not yet so clear to everyone. So the Taz says, on one hand, my goal is, I skip to the second paragraph, והנה אחרי רואי בהקדמת רבינו בעל בית יוסף, שחשש בדבר שהתורה נעשית לחמת תורות. So the בית יוסף was worried about the Torah becoming a few תורות. Why? Because there is no clear unitary פסק. ובדורנו זה, in the second line, בדורנו זה חזר החשש למקומו. So he wrote the בית יוסף in the Shulchan Aruch, and it was good for 20 years. But now the problem is back. Why? Because there are the geniuses, the Gionim, Maharash Luria. We didn't speak about him. He is the relative. We spoke him when we spoke about the Rema. He's the relative of the Rema. The Maharshal. And we have Rabbi Yoshua Falk. We have Mori Chotni. We have, it says, my father-in-law, Rabbi Yoel, the Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. All of them written new Sefarim. And now again, you do not know how to give the psak. So we are stuck again. We are confused again. And he says, on one hand, I want to set the record straight. So I want to give you the final authorized halacha, and that will be the end of the discussion. On the other hand, he says, I would add, as a sion, as a continuation to the glorious Ashkenazi tradition, he says, I also need but to defend all the opinions that came before me. So now you cannot have both. Right? You cannot defend all the opinions that came before you and also give a final decision. In order to give a final decision, you need to reject some of the opinions before you. And the Taz, in his introduction, if you see the last line here in this side of the page, אומנם כן, כי הדרך הנכון לפנינו אשר תהיה כל מגמת פנינו להצדיק דבריהם. But everything we want to do is to make them right, to justify their words. But you cannot justify everyone and then give a final psak halacha. Right? You cannot eat the cake and have it. Having cake and you can have a cake and then eat it. You can have it at the same time, have it and eat it. Yeah, exactly. So that's what it seems that you cannot have the stick from both ends. I mean, you can use whatever mashal you want, but not only in his akdama, I think that also in his perush, you can see how on one hand, he really wants to justify everyone that came before. On the other hand, he wants to give you a final psak. So every time he justifies something that really should not be justified, he is apologizing for justifying something that he doesn't really think is correct. On the other hand, every time he gives you a psak halacha, he's apologizing for giving you a psak halacha and not entertaining all of the opinions that came, isn't that the right word? Yeah, with all the opinions that came before him. So it's very interesting. It's torn apart between these two contradictions. But he wants to appease himself. He wants to be both the final decisor, but also he wants to learn and to teach everyone's Torah. He doesn't want to lose any shred of Torah. So it's a very interesting introduction, and his perush is famous for really trying to do both things. It's mostly interesting when he's taking issue with his father-in-law. So many times he would quote his father-in-law. Sometimes he would accept. Sometimes he would reject. Always it would be in a honorable manner. So he wouldn't say my father-in-law just wrote shtuyot. That would not happen. But he can be sometimes very, very clear. And you would say he wrote, but his proofs are not proofs for the following reasons. And you would explain why. And then you would give a psak that would be against his father-in-law. So that can and it does happen. So the Taz published his Turei Zahav, his book on Yoredea, while he was still alive. And the book was very well accepted. The Taz was very well known in the Ashkenazi world, very well known. And in a sense, it became the standard. Now, it was by the will of God Almighty that in the same year that the Taz wrote his book, there was another book published by a very much younger Torah scholar, was named Rabbi Shabtai Cohen. He is an extremely fascinating figure by himself. I do want to speak about him, Mir Tzashem, next week, so I'm not going to expand about him now. But Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, who was, I think, 40 years younger than 30 years younger than the Taz. He wrote his book younger than 30. Younger than 30. He is publishing a work on Yoredea, in which he is taking issues with Sikot of very important Torah scholars that came before. Now, he is, again, a guy younger than 30. And also he's taking issues with the Taz. He writes comments on the Taz. He called them Nekudot HaKesef, because Torah is Zahav Na'aseh Lach im Nekudot HaKesef. So he's using the same verse from Shir HaShirim. The Taz is trying to defend himself. The Taz writes answers to the comments, to the Hasagot of Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, and it becomes one of the most famous rivalries. Thank you. In the world of Torah between the Taz and the Shach. This day in Yoredea, they are printed from both sides of the Shulchan Aruch, which I think is a beautiful way, a beautiful Jewish way of how do you do machloiket, right? You do not have only the one, you have both of them from both sides. They met under very unfortunate occurrences. As we spoke about last week, the ideally of Polish Jewry was not to last long, as in all of Jewish history, because in 6048, what we call Tach, Gzeirot Tach Vetat, in 6048 erupts a revolt against the Polish noblemen by the Ukrainian peasants, led by the Cossacks, led by Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Imach Shemo v'Zichro. I think we spoke it last week. I don't want again to speak at length. And the Taz loses both of his older sons, and that is someone that was already stricken by tragedy many, many years ago. And now both of his sons are being murdered on Kiddush Hashem in Lemberg, in Poland. He himself in Ostrog was almost also killed, according to the story, which again it's a legend. You'd see in a second that it has a legendary motives, but it seems that there is a core to that, and I'll explain in a second why. According to the story, according to the legend, the Cossacks, the Ukrainians are attacking the city. The Jews are gathering into the fortress of Ostrog with the Polish, because again, the Poles and the Jews were on the same side. Now it happened in many places that the Poles sold the Jews to the Ukrainians in order to save themselves. That's just the way that it went. But in Ostrog, it's not what happened. So they all gathered in the fortress and they were trying to defend themselves. The Jews also took arms and fought, but they were against much stronger forces. The Ukrainians were encircling the fortress, besieging it, and the situation was very, very dire. And the Taz gathered all the Jews of the city to, I don't know if there was a shul in the fortress or to some location, tefillah location, and they were davening their hearts out, we may say. And you know, we have you can see it in Source Zayin. That's how the story is being told. So he says that for a few days they were there and fasting and crying, and then Vayehi beyom echad. I'm in the middle of Source Zayin. Vayehi beyom echad. Hegishu chamil. Chamil is Chamilensky. Hegishu chamil vechilo od apam el hachoma. So they approached the walls of the fortress. ובסערת המלחמה בגבורה עזה הסתערו. And they stormed it courageously. ויעפילו לעלות על החומה ויפרצו בפרצות. They were able to ascend above the city wall and also to break through, it seems, some of the stones. כמעט שנכבשה העיר לפניהם. It was very close that the city would be overrun by the Cossacks. ועתה ז"ל עם עדתו עמדו בבית הכנסת. Now, they have nothing to do anymore, so they stand in shul davening. Just imagine that, maybe you don't want to imagine the situation. They are standing there, ושפכו צקון לחשם לפני השם. They are praying in front of God. ויבכו מאוד, and they were crying. כי ראו אשר עוד מעט יפלו ביד האויב. And if they would fall to the Cossacks, then death would be the easiest. That is the easy thing that can happen to them. והגאון התז על אשר היה חלוש מאוד מרוב התעניתים. Now the Taz was so weak. He was also not young anymore. He was born, he didn't say, he was born in 1586. So if we speak now in 1648, he was 58. So not very old, but also not a young, not a kid anymore. So after all of the fastings, he was very weak and he just fell asleep. So everyone is praying and davening and fasting, and the enemy is outside, and he's falling asleep. And as he's sleeping, he dreamt a dream. ובחלומו קראו לו את הפסוק, זה פסוק for מלכים, וגנותי על העיר הזאת להושיעה למעני ולמען דוד עבדי. Now that is a pasuk said by Yeshayahu to Chizkiyahu. When Chizkiyahu was besieged in Yerushalayim by Sancheriv, the king of Ashur, and also the situation looked desperate. And then Yeshayahu came to Chizkiyahu and told him God would save the city. Why? For God's name, for God's sake, and for the name of David HaMelech. But now the Taz, whose name is David, as I said, he had some type of identification with David HaMelech. So he dreams a dream that God says to him the pasuk. He says the pasuk that I would save this city, and now it's not Yerushalayim, it's Ostrog. I would save this city for the sake of my servant David, Leman David Avdi. And he wakes up and he says, Am Hashem chizku v'nitchazka. The people of God, we should be strong and in tefillah and in requests. Ki hayom yareinu Hashem niflot. God is going to show us miracles. And then in the fortress there were a cannon that was very old, and that is the famous cannon of Tach and Tat. Maybe you heard that. It's a famous legend. And they are trying to fire the cannon. The Polish are trying to fire the cannon. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't fire anything, but it makes a great noise. It makes a great noise, and the Ukrainians are getting scared, and they are running away, and the city is being saved. That is the story. Now, we know from historical sources, other historical sources, that at least 200 Jews were killed in Ostrog. So it is not clear how to reconcile this. It may be that they were killed during the siege. It may be that the Cossacks were able to storm inside, but they were not able to capture the shul. So we are not sure how exactly to reconcile. We would dismiss the whole thing as a complete legend, fiction, but we do have, it was found 100 years ago about, slichot written by the Taz, in which he alludes to a certain miracle that happened in his city. So it seems that the legend does have a historical core. What exactly is the core and what exactly is legendary? It's, I don't know, but that is the story. As you can imagine, the city was destroyed, and Rabbi David Segal Halevi needed to run away. He's running away. He's beginning to travel throughout different cities. One place, he is sleeping a few nights in the house of his great rival, Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, about which there are many legends about the Bit Mili. We do know that it happened because Rabbi Shabtai writes it in his introduction to his book. He says, don't think that I have something personal against Rabbi David. And as a proof, I can say that I hosted him in my house for a few days and we spoke a lot in Divrei Torah. Now, we do not, as I said, we all have wanted to be the fly on the wall, right, in these meetings. Anyhow, he continues and he ends up in Lebov. And he becomes the Rav of Lvov. How did he become a Rav of Lvov? That is another legend that I would share with you, and with that we would end the shiur. So in Lvov, according to the legend, he comes there and he says, I had enough being the head of the rabbis. I now want to be a simple man. So he's looking for work. Now he cannot be a builder. That's not his profession. So he works to be a mashgiach kashrut in the local slaughtering house, the shchita place. And okay, fine. Now, every time there is a question, an halachic safek, he deals with it. He's a gaon, he wrote the book. So he gives the psak. No one knows that the person that knows a little can give some tshuva. He is the greatest gaon of Poland. That is the Taz. Now, the Rav of Lebov was Rabbi Meir Zak, which was an important rabbi. And he begins to notice that no questions are being sent from the slaughtering house for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks. Something suspicious happens. So he sends one of his meshamshim to the slaughtering house to ask how can be there are no questions? And the guy goes to the menahel, to the manager of the slaughtering house. So yes, we have a new guy, and he is answering all of our shelos. So we do not send any more shelos. The shamash comes back to the Rav. So they have a new Rav there. So as you can imagine, Rabbi Meir Zak is very angry, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. There is a concept of the Mara de Atra, the local rabbi, and no one is allowed to interfere with the authority of the local rabbi. So Rabbi Meir Zak does not know that he's dealing here with the Taz. So he sends to call this young, not young, this man to his office. And Rabbi David comes. What's your name? David. Fine, David. And Rabbi Meir Zak says, what do you do? And Rabbi David says, I read a little, I know a little, so I answered the shelos. And Rabbi Meir Zak says, you are not allowed to do so. And as a punishment, he puts him to the kone. Now, what is the kone? The kone was, I think the English word is pilatory. There is a pole in the entrance to the shul that you are if you are being punished, you are being chained to this pole in the entrance of the shul, and everyone that goes into the shul and goes out sees you, and there is a sign stating your aveira. Obviously, that's a great disgrace, and he gave him 3 days in the kone. So he's standing there, chained to this pole, this amuda kalon. That's the Hebrew word, but the Yiddish word is kone, and I think it's pilatory, the English word. And no, it's something else? You'd look it up, okay. So anyway, so he's standing, but he doesn't want to reveal his true identity, so he accepts the punishment, and he stands there for 3 days. The third day is Friday, Shabbativ, and he stands there and enters the shul. And the Rav is sitting, is off, the Rav's office is in the shul. And he sees a young girl, 10 years old, coming out of the shul, crying, with a box, with a chicken. And he asks the girl, what's going on? Why do you cry? And the girl says, my parents were saving in order to buy us a chicken for Shabbat. And Baruch Hashem, on Friday, my father went to the market and he bought chicken, and my mother went to the slaughter and he shachted the chicken. But there was a sheila, there was a doubt about the kashrut of the chicken. And they went to the Rav, and the Rav says it's asur. So now we have to throw the chicken, and we would not have chicken meat for Shabbat. And Rabbi David stands there, and he says, let me have a look. And so the girl, okay, what does the girl know? She gives him to look the chicken, and he looks there, and obviously no sefarim, no anything, and he runs through all of the sugiyot. And then he says to the girl, go back into the shul, into the Rab's office, and tell him that he should look at this. There is a sefer named Taz, and he should look in it in Siman Kuf Dalet, Seif Dalet. Okay. Again, the girl goes in, and she goes to the Rav, and says to him, there is a book named Taz, and you should look in it. The Rav obviously is blown away, but he's Yireh Shamayim. So, okay, if the girl is coming in, he's going to the sefer, it looks, and he was mistaken. You can be matir the chicken. So he reverses his psika. And then he says to the girl, you must tell me, who told you that to look at the Taz? And the girl says, I do not know, there is a guy chained to the door. He told me. So the Rav understands that there is some great mistake here, because if someone can be chained to the door and knows by heart some obscure siman in the Taz, we are dealing here with a gown. So he is worried now. Who did I chain to the shul's door? So he's calling Rabbi David in, and he's saying to him, you must reveal who your true identity is. And the Taz told him that I am Rabbi David Halevi Segal. I wrote the Turei Zahav. And you can imagine the scene. The end of that is that Rabbi Meir Zak apologized and begs Rabbi David to replace him as the Rav of the city. And Rabbi David says, I don't want to replace you. But he becomes his second in command. And when Rabbi Meir Zak is niftar, passed away a few years later, Rabbi David becomes the main Rav of Lebov, which was the position that he held till his Petira. Now, I told you that would be the last story, but I have 2 minutes. So another short story. In 1666, some of you may recognize it's a very important year in Jewish history. It is the year of Shabtai Tzvi.
The Great Fire of London.
The Great Fire of London, yeah, okay. That's important, but you know, Jews were not really allowed to live in London in 1666. So in Jewish history, the Great Fire of London was not extremely important. But that is the year in which Shabtai Tzvi, which we obviously do not have now the time to go into, and hopefully in some other shiur we would go into the whole thing of Shabtai Tzvi. But enough for us to say now that he was a failed Messiah, but obviously when he was beginning to become known, no one knew that he is a false Messiah. For them, he was maybe the true Mashiach. So that's what did he know and didn't? It's a very big question. According to the research of the last 100 years, that mostly promoted by Gershom Shulem, then we think that he had some type of a mental disability. Maybe again, trying to analyze someone 400 years ago, obviously it's a very problematic, but maybe they say that he maybe had a bipolar disorder. A bipolar disorder, yeah, exactly. And in his mania, he thought that he is a Mashiach. That's how things are being understood in the last 100 years. But again, even people that live today, you do not always being able to recognize a certain mental illness. So analyzing some 400 years ago, but fine. But they have. Hopefully, I do hope to speak. It's a fascinating, obviously, story, and I do hope to speak about it in some future Be'ez Hashem shiur. Be it as it may, the Taz, as the chief rabbi of Poland, sent a missionary that was gathered from his son and his son-in-law. He sent them to check Shabtai Tzvi, and they went to him in 1666 and came back, but the Taz was not convinced, neither way. So he didn't give an hate. If he would have given an hechsher, that was a big problem because the whole of Polish Jews completely go off. They went off as it was. But Baruch Hashem, he was not completely fooled by Shabtai Tzvi, so he didn't give a psak, just waited with that. And then when Shabtai Tzvi Islamized, then he was able to wash his hands completely from the matter. So there's again another interesting story about the Taz. He was niftar 2 years later in 1668. He was considered, even after his ptira, both in his life and after his ptira, the Vad Arba Artzot, the Committee of 4 Lands, which was like the chief Vad board. This was like the ultimate shul board of all of Polish Jewry. The Arba Artzot was because it was consisted of 4 different geographical elements, and they issued a psak 20 years after his ptira, that everyone must follow the halachot of Rabbeinu Rabbi David Halevi Segal. So they tried to uphold his goal that everyone would follow his halachot. As you know, things didn't turn this way because they never turned this way, not for the Rambam, not for the Shulchan Aruch, and not for Rabbi David Halevi Segal. Nowadays, sometimes we follow Rabbi David Halevi Segal, sometimes we follow in Orach Chaim the Magen Avram, in Yoredea the Shach, and in other areas, other poskim, but he became part of the fund. You cannot learn Yoredea without learning the Taz. You cannot learn learning without learning his commentary is not learning. No serious learner can give any psak without relating to what the Taz wrote. And that is the real immortal achievement. Trying to conclude everything that is beyond human reach. But becoming part of Torah, as we said earlier, embodying in a way the institutional rabbinical element, that's something that he did became and he did achieve, and I think that is his lasting legacy. So with that, we end with Rabbi David Halevi, and Be'ezrat Hashem, next week I hope to speak, as I said, about his, and I told it in quotes, his great nemesis, Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, the Shach, who led short but very interesting life. I am already expecting Be'ezrat Hashem next year. Thank you, and Shavua Tov.